You know, we hear it all the time, right? If you want to succeed, you need to specialize and you need to do it early. Pick a practical major, get the right skills, and start climbing that ladder. But what if that whole idea is kind of wrong? Today, we're going to dig into why your personal story and having a broad range of knowledge might just be the real key to getting to the very top. All right, let's just jump right in with a question for you. If you had to guess, what's the most common college major for a CEO of a huge S&P 500 company? I mean, your first thought is probably something like business, right? Or maybe finance, economics. It seems pretty obvious. Well, check this out. According to data from 2004, only about 28.5% of S&P 500 CEOs actually majored in business. Yeah, you heard that right. That means the vast majority of them didn't. This one little statistic basically flips the entire script on what we assume the direct path to leadership looks like. And that brings us to what we could call the CEO success myth. This whole idea that you need a super narrow, super specialized education to get that corner office, well, it turns out it's mostly just that, a myth. Here's the thing that's so interesting. There's a huge difference between short-term and long-term success. Those specialized skills, they are absolutely fantastic for landing you your first job right out of college. But a broad, adaptable mindset, that's what gets you ready to lead an entire company. So the key takeaway here is pretty simple. What gets you in the door isn't always what's going to get you to the top floor. So if specialization isn't the whole answer, then what is? Well, that leads us to this really elegant and powerful concept called consilience. Consilience. It's a fantastic word, right? It was coined way back in 1847, and it literally means the jumping together of knowledge from totally different fields. It's this ability to connect the dots, to see the links between science and art, or history and economics, and to really understand the big picture. And the guy who coined the term, Whewell, he explained why this is just so powerful. He basically said that our ideas become way more potent, way more forceful, when they can help us understand things outside of their original little box. It's not just about knowing one thing really well. It's about using that knowledge to make sense of everything else. And we can even see consilience in action right here with this amazing example from neuroscience. So, in this incredible experiment back in 1958, a researcher stimulated just one single point on a patient's brain with an electrode. And what happened? A whole, complete, detailed story just poured out of her memory. This was profound. It suggested that our brains are physically wired to think in stories, in narratives. It's like neuroscience finally proving what storytellers have known for thousands of years. Okay, so if our brains are wired for stories, what in the world does that have to do with leadership? Well, it means that the most effective leaders, the ones who really change things, are almost always master storytellers. I mean, just look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He stepped into the presidency during the Great Depression, one of the absolute darkest moments in American history. The country didn't just have an economic problem, it had a crisis of hope. It desperately needed a new story. And FDR was a complete genius at this. He was a master at finding and using powerful narratives. He didn't even write this song, but when his team played Happy Days Are Here Again at the 1932 convention, it totally electrified the room. He took a popular tune and turned it into a national symbol of optimism. He did it again with his inaugural address. That iconic line, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," it wasn't originally his. He borrowed it from an economist. But by saying it at that moment, in that context, he transformed it into this incredible national rallying cry against the despair of the Depression. And then, of course, the name for his entire revolutionary program, A New Deal, also borrowed, this time from a book title. Why was that so brilliant? Well, think about it. In a capitalist country that was terrified of anything that smelled like socialism, framing his radical new policies as a deal, a concept everyone understood and trusted, was an absolute masterstroke of storytelling. And this wasn't just an FDR thing. Decades later, another master storyteller, President Ronald Reagan, used a completely different tool, humor. He used to tell these jokes that were circulating inside the Soviet Union to poke holes in the communist system. It was way more effective than some dry, boring policy speech, because it was a story people could instantly get, remember, and even repeat. Okay, so we've seen how presidents can literally shape history with the stories they tell. But here's the thing. This isn't just for world leaders. It applies to every single one of us. So let's talk about crafting your own personal narrative. This art of personal branding, of crafting your own story, is absolutely timeless.
On the left, you've got advice from some cynic way back in the 2nd century who's basically saying, hey, fake it till you make it. Then you fast forward almost 2,000 years, and you have Donald Trump on the right saying something remarkably similar. Create your own larger-than-life story, your own comic book, and then just live in it.
And these personal narratives, they evolve over time. For generations, the story of success was go to a good college, get a degree. But then a totally new story started to emerge, the story of the brilliant college dropout. You had people like Edwin Land, who founded Polaroid, and later, of course, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. They created this powerful new narrative where dropping out wasn't a failure. It was a sign of a genius who was just too busy changing the world to waste time in a classroom. So you see, these stories aren't just little tools for personal branding. They have a massive impact on society as a whole. They actually shape our collective future.
And other fields are really starting to wake up to this. This chart is pretty telling. It shows the use of the word narrative in academic papers. And yeah, the hard numbers fields like finance and economics have been the slowest to catch on, but look at the trend. Every single bar is pointing up. There's this growing realization that stories drive human behavior, even in something as rational as the stock market.
But this all leads us to a really tricky moral question. What if telling a slightly exaggerated story, a little bit of phoniness, gives you the influence you need to do something genuinely good for society? It's a really blurry line, and it's something that both leaders and all of us as listeners have to think about all the time.
So, in the end, the path to leadership, to making a real impact, isn't just about what you know or what's written on your resume. It's about the story you can tell. A story that connects all those different ideas and inspires people to actually do something. The stories we choose to tell and the ones we choose to believe in, they literally build our reality. So the question to leave you with is this: what story will you tell?